Babysitting had always been my go-to weekend job. Parents trusted me, kids usually liked me, and the nights were easy. Pop some popcorn, put on a movie, and collect cash at the end. That night was no different. The Miller kids, Sophie and Ethan, were already in their pajamas when I arrived. Their parents waved goodbye, reminding me the emergency numbers were on the fridge. The house felt safe, bright kitchen lights, soft hum of the TV, and the comfort of a normal suburban neighborhood. I tucked the kids in early, both falling asleep faster than I expected. By 9:30, I was alone in the living room, scrolling through my phone and sipping soda. That's when the doorbell rang. It startled me. No one was supposed to be stopping by. I froze, staring at the door. After a moment, I got up and peeked through the window. A man stood on the porch, holding a cardboard package. His brown jacket and cap looked like standard delivery gear, though I didn't recognize the company logo. "Delivery for the Millers," he called, voice low but firm. I hesitated. The Millers hadn't mentioned expecting a package. Still, I cracked open the door, the chain lock still on. "They're not home right now. Can you come back tomorrow?" He smiled, but something about it felt wrong. Too forced, too wide. "I just need a quick signature. Won't take a second." He held out a pen. My gut screamed no. "Sorry, I can't sign for it." The smile faded. His eyes, flat and unblinking, stayed locked on me. He leaned closer. "Maybe you should step outside. Make it easier." A chill raced down my spine. I shut the door and slid the deadbolt in place. Heart pounding, I rushed back to the living room. For a while, silence returned. Maybe he'd left. Maybe I was just paranoid. Then I heard it. Soft scratching against the back door. I crept into the kitchen, every nerve on edge. A shadow shifted just outside the sliding glass door, too tall to be a trick of the light. He hadn't gone. He was circling the house. I ducked down, holding my breath. Seconds stretched into minutes. Finally, the sound faded, and I dared to breathe. But deep down, I knew the night wasn't over. Something about that man told me he wasn't going to walk away. I locked every window, every door, and double-checked them twice. Still, the uneasy feeling clung to me like a heavy blanket. Sophie stirred upstairs, murmuring in her sleep, and I whispered to myself, "It's fine. Just get through the night." But the scratching returned, louder this time. Then, a thud. My stomach dropped as I realized it wasn't coming from the back door. It was upstairs. I bolted up the staircase, careful not to make noise, and pushed open Sophie's bedroom door. She was still asleep, clutching her stuffed rabbit. The sound had stopped. For a moment I convinced myself it had been my imagination. Then, from the hallway behind me, floorboards creaked. Someone was inside. I froze, every muscle locked. Slowly, I turned my head. Down the dark hall, a shadow shifted at the far end, near Ethan's room. My pulse hammered in my ears. I dashed forward, scooped Ethan out of bed, and whispered urgently, "Shh, stay quiet." He clung to me, half awake, as I rushed back for Sophie. By the time I had them both, the hallway was silent again. Too silent. We crept downstairs, the kids trembling in my arms. My only thought was to get us out. I reached for the front door, but as I grabbed the handle, I noticed something taped across the lock. Fishing line. My chest tightened. He had rigged it. If I yanked the door, an alarm or trap might spring. He wanted us to try. I backed away, mind racing. The phone. I needed to call for help. But when I reached for the cordless on the kitchen counter, the line was dead. He'd cut it. The kids were whimpering now, scared and confused. I hushed them, pulling us into the pantry. I crouched low, clutching them close, straining to hear any sound. For a long minute, nothing. Then, a soft knock against the pantry door. "Open up," the man whispered. His voice was calm, almost playful. "I know you're in there. Don't make this harder." Sophie buried her face in my shoulder. Ethan began to cry, muffled and shaking. My own hands trembled, but something inside me hardened. If I stayed in here, we were trapped. I spotted the heavy cast-iron skillet hanging on the wall rack. Quietly, I grabbed it, setting Sophie and Ethan behind me. My breath was shallow, my legs weak, but I tightened my grip. The knock came again, louder. The door handle twisted. I raised the skillet high, ready to fight, and just as the door began to creak open, red and blue lights flashed through the front windows. Sirens wailed outside. The man vanished into the shadows before I could even see his face. When the police burst in minutes later, they found the rigged door, the cut phone line, and footprints circling the house. But the predator was gone, leaving nothing behind except the certainty that he had planned this night for weeks. And me, I still babysit sometimes, but every time the doorbell rings, my chest tightens, because I know monsters don't always hide under the bed. Sometimes they wait right outside your door. I never expected a burglary report to turn into the worst night of my life. I'd been a detective for 15 years, and quiet Saturday nights were supposed to be a relief, a chance to catch up on paperwork, sip stale coffee, and remind myself why I'd chosen this job. But that night, everything changed. It started when they brought in a man named Elliot Drake, a small-time thief, mostly petty break-ins, the kind of guy you glance at on the street and forget 2 seconds later. My partner was off sick, so they left the interrogation to me. I figured it would be routine, a confession, some paperwork, done by midnight. Drake didn't act like any suspect I'd ever met. He sat perfectly still, hands folded on the metal table, eyes fixed on me with a sharp, calculating intensity. When I introduced myself, he just nodded slowly. "Detective," he said, "I think we should talk about the Crawford case first." The Crawford case. The memory hit me like a punch to the gut. The girl, Emily Crawford, 10 years old, strangled in her own home. A case I never solved. A case that still haunted me in dreams. And this petty thief knew details that were never public. The way she'd scratched her attacker, the marks on her wrists, even the small doll she clutched for comfort. I tried to redirect him back to the burglaries, but Drake just smiled, slow and chilling. "You're good at noticing patterns, detective, but not good enough to see the danger around you." Every word he spoke felt like it was sinking into my chest, freezing my blood. He listed other unsolved cases, every single one I had touched and failed to solve, and described details only someone inside the investigation could know. "How do you know this?" I asked, my voice shaking despite years of training. He leaned back, hands still cuffed to the table. "Because I watch, I observe, I follow the threads that others ignore, and you've been looking in the wrong places." Then he dropped the part that made my stomach turn. "A girl tonight, one who filed a complaint against the city's social services. She's in danger. You have hours to reach her, detective, or she won't make it." My mind raced. Was he lying? Was this some elaborate distraction? But the details, the specifics, were impossible. My only thought was to save her, to get out of that room and find her before it was too late. I reached for the door, but something in the air made me pause. The recording light in the corner flickered strangely, like someone was tampering with it. Drake smirked. "You think I'm the enemy, detective? No, I'm the only one trying to make sure you survive tonight." And just like that, the interrogation room became a trap I couldn't see the walls of. Someone else was watching. Someone I thought I could trust might be on the wrong side. And I knew deep down that I was running out of time. I bolted from the interrogation room and barely registered the chaos behind me. Shouts, the crash of chairs, the sharp scent of fear in the air. My phone buzzed with an unknown number. "The address is your only chance." I didn't hesitate. Every instinct screamed that a child's life depended on me, even if the world outside this precinct was conspiring against me. The streets were empty except for the occasional patrol car, but I couldn't call for backup. Not knowing who I could trust, I had to move alone. Every shadow seemed to twitch. Every flicker of light made me flinch. Elliot Drake's warning replayed in my mind. The monsters hide behind familiar faces. I felt that truth more than ever as I glanced at officers' silhouettes through the windows of nearby buildings. I arrived at a small townhouse at the edge of the city. The front door was ajar, a single light flickering inside. I drew my weapon, pushing forward. The air was thick with the smell of antiseptic and something else. Fear, cold and raw, lingering in the corners. In the living room, a young girl huddled behind the couch, trembling. Her eyes widened when she saw me, and relief washed over her face. "You came," she whispered. I swept the house, checking for anyone else. Empty, no sign of the intruder. But then I saw it. Scraps of paper on the floor, a path of breadcrumbs leading to a hidden basement door. My pulse quickened. This was far from over. I descended the stairs, each step creaking ominously under my weight, until I reached a small room lined with filing cabinets, photos, and notebooks. Each notebook detailed citizens, complaints, and cases that had disappeared without explanation. Someone had been methodically watching, recording, and eliminating anyone who threatened the system. It was worse than I imagined. The network was massive, built on fear and silence. And Elliot Drake? He hadn't been the intruder. He had been a guide, leaving clues for me to uncover the truth safely, steering me through a trap I might never have survived otherwise. I left the basement with the girl, making a silent promise to protect her and expose the corruption behind the masks of authority. I realized that monsters aren't always strangers in the dark. They're people you pass on the street, people sworn to protect, hiding crimes under the guise of normalcy. The city itself felt darker than ever before, a labyrinth of deceit and danger. And yet, as terrifying as the night had been, one truth remained. The detective who solves the unsolvable is not the one who follows orders blindly, but the one who trusts instinct, notices patterns, and takes risks others fear to take. Elliot Drake, the man nobody knew, had saved lives and revealed a nightmare hidden in plain sight. Walking away from that townhouse, I knew my life would never be the same. Every shadow on the street, every quiet knock at a door would remind me that vigilance isn't just a skill, it's survival. And in this city, the line between predator and protector is thinner than anyone could ever imagine. I'd been a patrol officer in Riverview for 15 years, and in all that time I thought I'd seen everything. But that Sunday changed everything I knew about fear. It started with a minor fender bender near the corner of Maple and 8th, a simple rear-end collision that barely left a dent. I was parked nearby on a routine traffic check when the call came in from dispatch, a woman insisting the supposed paramedics had taken her belongings. I glanced at my rookie partner, Alex, who had just finished his first month on the job. His eyes were wide with that mix of confusion and excitement that rookies get when something weird pops up. We arrived at Mrs. Lane's house, a neat little suburban place with pastel siding and a front yard full of fallen leaves. She was on the porch, trembling, her phone clutched to her chest like a lifeline. Her story made my stomach tighten. A white ambulance had pulled up days earlier after her fender bender. The two paramedics were wrong in every tiny detail. Their outfits looked more like costumes, and the equipment seemed oddly improvised, techniques that were sloppy enough for a professional to notice. And yet they moved with a strange confidence, asking about who lived in her home, when she left for work, if she had cameras or alarms, questions that felt out of place, more probing than medical. I felt chills as I listened. At first, I thought she'd misread the situation, but when she mentioned the man with a crow-shaped tattoo on his neck, my blood ran cold. Something about the way she described his eyes. It wasn't just careful observation, it was predatory. Alex and I drove the routes near her neighborhood, trying to trace the ambulance, but it was gone without a trace. By nightfall, calls started pouring in. A man in the next town reported seeing the same fake ambulance parked outside his neighbor's house with lights off, figures sneaking into the backyard. Another family had experienced an attempted break-in, with the intruders asking questions about home security, while wearing baseball caps instead of uniforms. It was clear these men were studying us, like we were part of some twisted experiment. We scoured local police records, hospitals, anything we could find. Then, a real paramedic tipped us off. He'd spotted an ambulance parked at a warehouse, but everything about it screamed, wrong. No proper equipment, fake license plate, empty interior. Alex and I went there that night, quietly, hearts pounding, flashlights cutting through the darkness. When we peeked through the chain-link fence, I froze. The van was there, still warm, and through the windows, we could see boxes stacked with medical supplies, uniforms, and images of places and incidents they clearly shouldn't have had. It wasn't just theft. They'd been planning this, meticulously, and the warehouse was eerily quiet, except for the soft creak of a loose metal shutter. Then I saw it, a shadow move across the floor inside, faster than it should have been possible. My hand went to my radio, but before I could speak, the van's back doors slammed shut, the sound carrying sharply through the alley in the empty yard. And in that instant, I knew we weren't just dealing with thieves. We were dealing with imposters who had been observing us closely, preparing for just the right time to act. The next morning, every quiet street in Riverview felt dangerous. Alex and I tracked reports of incidents that seemed to follow a troubling pattern: minor accidents, questionable medical attention, and missing property. We pieced together a map of their territory, connecting neighborhoods that had no business being linked, except by the movements of these two men. Each house told the same story. The victims had unknowingly given them access to their schedules, routines, and weaknesses, and now we were chasing shadows. We set up surveillance at the warehouse, but night after night, nothing. It was as if the men had sensed our presence, slipping away just before we arrived. Then came the tip from a neighbor in Cedar Park. She noticed someone standing outside her window, quietly writing in a notebook. That was the break we didn't want, but desperately needed. Alex and I arrived minutes later, creeping through the overgrown grass. My flashlight beam caught the gleam of a crow tattooed on a man's neck. I froze. My heart pounded in my ears. There was no time for hesitation. The man was already inside the warehouse, moving quickly, aware of the shadows outside. Alex whispered for me to wait, but instinct overrode caution. I pushed the door open, and the scent hit me first: cleaning fluid, cardboard, and something metallic underneath. And then I saw them. Two men, one tall with a limp that made him sway slightly as he moved, the other stocky and fast, like a panther in human skin. They were organizing photos, notes, and maps, planning their next targets. For a moment, I thought they hadn't noticed. Then the stocky man looked up. Those dark, calculating eyes locked on me, and a slow smile spread across his face. He wasn't afraid. They were never afraid. And in that moment, I realized just how much danger we'd been in, how carefully they had studied the routines of our town, how perfectly they had adapted to avoid detection. Step away from the door, drawing my weapon. Alex suit. The tall man with the limp moved toward a side exit, and the stocky one froze, glancing at the papers scattered on the floor. For a split second, it seemed like they might run, but then the lights flickered, not from electricity, but from something in the shadows behind them, a movement we couldn't quite identify. Something was watching them, too. Before we could react, the man snatched up a pile of papers and ran off in the dimly lit alley. Alex and we chased, but he vanished quickly into the maze of city streets. Only the tall man remained, staring at the notes on the floor as if he'd just realized something terrifying. Then he turned toward us, calm, deliberate, almost sad. "You don't understand," he said, voice low. "We're not done. You think you caught us, but this is just the beginning." And then he vanished into the night, leaving Alex and me in the empty warehouse with the scattered files, the cold metal smell of fear lingering in the air. That's when I knew the hunt had only begun, and whatever twisted minds had been masquerading as saviors were still out there, watching, planning, and waiting for the perfect moment to strike again. I'd been a deputy sheriff in northern Montana for nearly 5 years, and I thought I'd seen it all: drunken fights, petty thefts, and the occasional high-speed chase. Small town life, predictable and quiet. That Tuesday, though, the kind of quiet that lulls you into thinking everything is safe, turned sinister. The dispatch call came through just after noon. A two-car collision on Redwood Road, a winding forest stretch nearly 20 miles from town. Nothing unusual on paper, just a routine response. By the time I reached the scene, the sun was low, but the woods cast thick shadows across the road. A blue pickup sat diagonally against a guardrail, its front bumper crumpled. Not far ahead, a silver sedan had smashed against a pine tree, hood bent, and steam rising from the radiator. The air was eerily still. I grabbed my flashlight and called out, "Sheriff's Department, anyone hurt? I'm here to help." Nothing, just the soft echo of my own voice bouncing off the pines. My training kicked in. Doors ajar, airbags deployed, but no bodies. No footprints in the mud leading away. People don't vanish without a trace. I moved between the vehicles, checking for clues, trying to rationalize the scene. The keys were in the ignition of the truck. The engine was cold, but hazard lights blinking, as if frozen in time. The sedan's interior told the same story. A spilled purse, a wallet, receipts scattered, yet no one around. Then I noticed something missing. Skid marks. No signs of braking. Nothing to suggest an actual crash had happened. A snap from the woods made me freeze. Another branch cracking. My hand hovered near my holster as I scanned the tree line. On the left, a figure stood perfectly still, hidden between the pines, watching me. Another emerged on the right, partially behind a fallen log. My pulse raced. Both were holding radios, and their movements suggested coordination. This wasn't random. It was a trap. I backed toward my cruiser, weapon drawn, trying to stay calm. "Drop your radios! Step out with your hands up!" I barked, but they didn't respond. Then two more figures climbed out from the bed of the pickup, previously concealed under a tarp. I was surrounded. 4 people, all strategically placed. The bearded man in front smiled, and my stomach dropped when he said my name. "Deputy Green. Nice to finally meet you out here." Somehow, they knew everything. My routines, my habits, even my weekend fishing trips. This was personal. "You've been looking into your partner's death, haven't you?" The woman on the right said calmly, stepping closer. My late partner, Tommy, had been found dead years ago in what was ruled a suicide. I never believed it. They motioned to a duffel bag beside the sedan. Documents, photos, recordings, evidence that Tommy had been close to uncovering something big, and that his death wasn't an accident. As engines roared in the distance, signaling the arrival of more deputies, I realized I had seconds to choose: stay and risk my life, or go with these strangers who knew more about the truth than anyone else. My heart thundered as I reached for the duffel. Everything about this scene, the abandoned cars, the forest, the orchestrated distractions, was designed to test me. And now, there was no turning back. I made my choice. Holstering my weapon, I followed them into a narrow gap between the trees, my uniform snagging on branches as I stumbled over roots. Behind us, the distant shouts of arriving deputies echoed, but the strangers moved quickly, effortlessly, like they'd done this hundreds of times before. The bearded man led, the woman guiding me, while the younger pair swept the forest behind us, making sure no one followed. We emerged into a small clearing where 2 unmarked SUVs waited, engines running. I climbed into the back of the nearest vehicle, still tense, heart hammering. The bearded man handed me a small flash drive. "Everything your partner gathered is on this," he said. "Badge numbers, photos, audio recordings, financial documents, evidence that can take down everyone who betrayed him, including the sheriff." Hours passed as we drove along hidden dirt roads, switching vehicles once to avoid detection. Every shadow felt like a threat, every crack of a twig under a tire sending adrenaline through my veins. Finally, we reached a safe house near the state line. Inside, I spread out the documents, every piece confirming the nightmares I'd been suspecting for years. Sheriff Randall and several deputies had been taking bribes, silencing anyone who threatened to expose them, including Tommy. Sitting there, I realized how close I'd come to becoming another victim. The staged accident, the careful monitoring of my routines, the forest trap. It was designed to test my trust and push me into making a fatal mistake. But the strangers weren't enemies. They were former federal agents who had been tracking the corruption alongside Tommy, waiting for the right moment to reveal the truth and protect those who were still clean. Days later, the arrests happened. Sheriff Randall, 2 deputies, and a local judge were all taken into custody. The evidence on the flash drive ensured convictions. I testified under protection, my name kept secret from the public. Meanwhile, I was relocated, given a new identity, and joined a federal task force investigating corruption in law enforcement. The strangers, Howard, Elena, Doy, and Marcus, vanished as quietly as they had appeared, leaving me with the tools to continue what Tommy started. Even now, years later, I think back to that forest. The cars, the empty road, the silence that swallowed everything. It's a memory that never leaves. What haunts me most isn't the danger itself, but the realization that those we trust the most can hide the deadliest secrets, and that sometimes survival doesn't mean winning a fight, but making the right choice in the blink of an eye. I thought I'd seen everything in my years as a deputy, but nothing prepared me for that call. It came through dispatch late in the afternoon, supposedly a dead animal complaint on the outskirts of the county. Out here, that could mean anything. A deer hit on the road, a cow that wandered off, a carcass left to rot. But something in the woman's voice made my stomach tighten. She wasn't exaggerating. She insisted this wasn't a hog or a deer. She said it smelled disturbingly human. I grabbed my flashlight, keys, and a deep breath before heading out. By the time I pulled up to the old farmhouse, another cruiser was already there. Deputy Harlan leaned against his car, arms crossed, his face pale under the fading sun. The place looked abandoned as always. Roof sagging, windows boarded, weeds crawling over every inch of the yard. But the smell hit me before I even stepped out of my car. Thick, sour, almost cloying in the worst way. My stomach turned and I knew. We both did. We circled the house cautiously, boots crunching on broken glass, until the pecan trees at the back gave away the truth. The ground was disturbed, fresh soil piled into grotesque mounds. One was shallow enough that a black leather boot poked through, flies circling near it. I swallowed bile, steeling myself, and radioed for the coroner and backup. Every detail screamed deliberate carelessness, someone digging just deep enough to be hidden, yet sloppy enough that we would find it. The thought that this hideout had been under our noses for years made my chest tighten. The cadaver dogs arrived, noses pressed to the dirt, tails rigid, as they alerted in 3 separate spots beyond the first mounds. I followed them, marking each with orange flags, the field beginning to resemble a grim map of markers. The coroner arrived just as dusk swallowed the sky. Floodlights cut through the shadows, the smell clinging heavily in the air. I stayed, though my colleagues rotated out for air, determined not to let fear make me retreat. The first identifications came slowly. A transient worker reported missing weeks ago, a seasonal farmhand. A man nobody noticed had vanished. My stomach churned as I realized the pattern. Someone had chosen victims no one would miss, quietly, methodically. And yet the farmhouse offered no clues as to who this was. Shadows stretched long across the field, and I felt eyes on us, though I knew it was just the night playing tricks. Still, an icy certainty crept up my spine. Whoever did this knew the land better than any of us, and he wasn't done. The following days were a blur of interviews and canvassing. Neighbors mentioned a drifter, tall, wiry, always moving, never giving a straight answer about his past. He carried a shovel like it was an ordinary tool, blending seamlessly into the background. I kept picturing him walking down the county road, boot soles scuffing the dust, confident no one was noticing him. And with each new detail, The unease in my gut deepened. Back at the farmhouse, cadaver dogs had led us to at least 3 more graves beyond the initial site, each one shallow, each one meticulously placed. Floodlights turned the field into a stage, each spade of dirt a revelation. I watched as the coroner lifted bodies layer by layer, noting that all the victims shared the same pattern: drifters, seasonal workers, isolated souls with no one to report them missing immediately. My heart sank. This wasn't random. This was strategic. Neighbors described fleeting sightings: a man with a canvas duffel, sometimes walking along county roads, sometimes vanishing into the trees. He was always quiet, always observing. When I interviewed workers from nearby farms, they remembered him faintly, a shadow in the background of their memories. No one could pin down where he came from. And by the time we pieced everything together, he was gone, slipped away before anyone could catch him, leaving only the graves behind. I drive past that farmhouse sometimes, and the hairs on my neck stand up, even years later. I catch that scent sometimes. Sweet, wrong, unforgettable, and it sends me back there instantly. Floodlights, flags fluttering in the wind, the heavy quiet of a place that has seen too much. Men like him don't just stop. They move on, find another forgotten corner, and start over. I've driven past empty farmhouses since, each one a potential hiding place. Each drifting stranger I see triggers the memory. I know he's still out there, confident, patient, and waiting for his next invisible victim. Even after the bodies were exhumed and given what dignity could be restored, even after the case was filed away, the fear lingered. It's in the smell, the silence, the shadows that cling to the edge of fields at night. And I know that somewhere, in some forgotten back road or abandoned farmhouse, a man moves quietly along back roads, shovel in hand, unnoticed by most. And maybe that's the worst part. Not just what he did, but that he can do it again, anywhere, anytime. I'd been a deputy in rural Kansas for nearly 20 years, and I thought I'd seen it all. Loose cattle, drunken teens, even the occasional rattlesnake in someone's yard. But that August night changed everything. I was parked behind the old Texaco station on Highway 47, sipping cold coffee, watching for speeders, when Joyce's voice crackled over the radio. There was that edge in her tone, the kind that told you this wasn't routine. The Whelan family, she said, had someone circling their farmhouse for over an hour. They'd tried the doors, pressed against windows, never answering when Mr. Wheel shouted warnings from inside. My partner, Colton Briggs, fresh from the academy, fumbled with his flashlight, but I was already rolling down the gravel road, headlights off, navigating by the faint glow of the moon. When we reached the farmhouse, every light was blazing. The children peeked nervously from the upstairs windows, their faces filled with worry. Mr. Wheel met us at the door, shotgun in hand, shaking so badly he could barely explain what had happened. We started searching the perimeter with flashlights, and I immediately noticed the pattern: neat boot prints tracing a circle around the house, small items left behind, and faint marks along the door frames. Whoever this was, they weren't drunk or clumsy. This was calculated. 2 nights later, calls poured in from nearby families. Someone had been trying their windows, leaving the same meticulous prints, the same cigarette brands, the same eerie patience. Mapping the incidents, Colton and I realized they formed a rough circle around the old Hutchinson dairy farm, abandoned after a fire years ago. I felt that familiar chill, the kind that creeps up your spine when you realize you're dealing with someone who's been watching, learning, waiting. That night, Colton and I took the first surveillance shift, hiding behind a grove of cottonwoods near the burned barn. Around 11:30 p.m., a figure emerged from the ruins carrying a lantern. My stomach dropped. The man moved with purpose, pulling supplies from hidden caches. When he spotted us, he bolted, and we gave chase through the dark fields. His movements were too precise, like he'd memorized every furrow, every fence. For minutes that felt like hours, we ran through the corn rows, flashlights slicing through the black, until he slipped out of sight into the shadows near the highway. By dawn, we found his makeshift camp, blankets tucked into old grain bins, notebooks filled with sketches of the town, and pages showing how long he'd been watching the area schedules of families' routines, and a calendar marking each successful run. This wasn't a random trespasser. He had been here for months, blending in with the night, observing, planning. Colton and I stared at the pages, realizing just how carefully this man had watched our quiet county. Over the next few days, the manhunt escalated. Helicopters scanned the cornfields with heat sensors. K9 units traced scents to dead ends and streams. The more we searched, the more we saw traces. Traces left behind at abandoned buildings, tracks near old water towers, and scattered belongings that didn't seem to belong there. Whoever he was, he moved like a ghost, predicting our patrols, testing boundaries, always a step ahead. The breakthrough came when a young boy wandered off one evening, slipping outside while following his cat, wandering straight into the zone where the intruder had been operating. We surrounded the old storm shelter on the Zimmerman property, weapons ready, hearts hammering. Peering through the cracked doors, I saw tired eyes, a weary face, and the look of someone who had been on the run for weeks. The man wasn't violent. He kept his distance, warning the child quietly. His desperation to survive didn't erase his humanity. He wanted no harm to come to Kevin. I called out, and after a tense pause, the man stepped into the moonlight. Hollow cheeks, sunken eyes, a body worn thin by weeks of running. He surrendered without resistance. The relief in that moment was palpable. Kevin ran to safety, confused but unharmed, while we finally understood the truth. The man had started as desperate, maybe even dangerous, but not entirely lost to the darkness. Even after he was arrested, I couldn't shake that night. The quiet fields, the abandoned barns, the patient figure watching every move. I still think of him when I drive those gravel roads alone. Sometimes the real terror isn't what's hiding in the shadows, but what hides in plain sight, waiting for the right moment to test you. And in rural Kansas, it turns out, you never really know who's watching. I've driven the night shift on lonely highways for years, and they've always carried a strange weight. The silence, the endless asphalt, the kind of darkness that swallows your headlights whole. It all gets under your skin if you think about it too much. But that October night, something felt different the moment I spotted the Ford Focus parked on the shoulder near mile marker 228. At first glance, it seemed routine. Hazard lights blinking faintly, the driver's door wide open. But when I slowed and pulled over, unease crept into me like ice water. The engine was still running, the interior light glowing weakly. A purse sat on the passenger seat, a wallet visible inside, and a phone with a cracked screen wedged between the console and seat. There were no skid marks, no signs of impact, no footprints leading away. Just absence. I called it in, then checked the dash cam mounted on the windshield. The card was still inside. Curiosity edged out caution. I popped it into my laptop right there in my car. The footage began normally. A woman in her late 20s driving, sipping coffee, humming to the radio. Nothing out of place. Then the unease sharpened. A white semi appeared in the rear camera, its LED headlights glaring unnaturally bright. No matter how she adjusted her speed, the truck stayed 3 car lengths behind. Never closer, never farther. When she tried exiting, the truck mirrored her. I could see her posture stiffen, tears sliding down her face as she realized she wasn't imagining it. My chest tightened as I watched her flick on her blinker for a rest stop, only for the truck to signal too. She panicked, swerving back onto the highway. For a moment, relief softened her shoulders, until the world inside her car exploded with blinding light. The truck's high beams and floodlights swallowed everything. She had nowhere to run. The last minutes were chaos. Another van cutting her off, an SUV blocking her lane, glass shattering as a man leaned out with a crowbar. Her scream filled the small speakers of my laptop, raw and final. The recording ended with her dragged from the driver's seat, the camera staring at nothing but an empty car. I sat frozen, staring at the black screen long after the footage ended. My hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white. The sound of her scream wouldn't leave my head, echoing in the silence around me. The worst part was how ordinary everything looked. The quiet highway, the idling car, the purse waiting in plain sight. Backup arrived 20 minutes later, but the longer we searched, the colder the scene became. Tire tracks overlapped in confusing patterns, leading nowhere. The semi, the van, the SUV, gone, erased as if the road had swallowed them whole. We canvassed the area, checked gas stations, pulled surveillance tapes. Nothing. It was as if those vehicles had never existed, but I'd seen them. I'd heard her voice begging for help in those final seconds. That wasn't something I could file away as unknown circumstances. In the weeks that followed, more reports surfaced. Cars left on the shoulder, engines still running, belongings untouched. Sometimes the drivers were found days later, wandering empty rest stops in shock, unable to explain what had happened. Sometimes they weren't found at all. Each story felt like a piece of a larger puzzle, one I wasn't sure I wanted to solve. Now, every time I drive that stretch of highway, I catch myself checking my mirrors too often. Some nights I swear I see twin headlights hovering just out of reach, holding steady no matter how I change lanes. The radio static hisses like a whisper I can't make out, and the weight of that dash cam footage presses down on me. People talk about haunted houses, cursed woods, restless spirits. But I've come to believe highways have their own kind of hunger. They hide predators in plain sight, ordinary vehicles that blend into the night until it's too late. And when I pass another abandoned car, its engine humming quietly on the shoulder, I wonder if I'm too late again. Because sometimes, out here, evil doesn't linger in shadows or ghost stories. It rides the open road, waiting for someone to follow.